Here's a quick look at the brand new 2020 Cadillac CT5-V. It's an exciting new model that replaces the previous CTS-V, and in many ways this car is substantially superior to the previous model, and I'll get into more of that shortly. But for now, let's take a quick look through the exterior here. The car is significantly more updated throughout both exterior and interior, and it looks much more modern. Right now I have the engine running here, so you can hear the exhaust sound as well. It's got a nice growl to the exhaust sound, and the body design is, if not all that unique, because these sedans tend to look very similar these days, it is at least very modern and sharp. Cadillac has some interesting sharp crease lines, and this sort of inverted design here is also unique. It's trying to look a little bit like those new floating roof lines that's so popular these days. It's mimicking that slightly, but it's a great looking car overall. So let's do my usual engineering review. So first, I know the car is wet, but let's take a look at the overall body fit and finish, which is often a great reflection of how well the car is built. So the most important things to keep in mind here is whether or not these body panels fit properly. So let's take a look. So let's take a look to see how well the bodies are manufactured. This car is built in Lansing, Michigan factory of General Motors. So what I do is, as an engineer, I used to evaluate cars for a living, and also I built and manufacture and design cars for a number of car companies. So what I do here is I look for a body gap. This is something I do as an automotive engineer. I look for this gap to see if it's consistent, and more importantly, whether the panels on this side and this side is at the same height. And that is a really good determination on how well the bodies are made. I would say, compared to some of the best Japanese companies, in terms of the gap here, the consistency of the gap, and whether this panel is at the same height as this panel, I would give it absolutely a great score. But I would say, as I move to the forward here and I look through the hood, this gap here is a little bit wider than I like. It's still very good though for luxury sedan. This is what I expect. So I then take a look at the panels. Okay, that's actually very good. Then between the front and the rear panels as well. And one more. So you can see here, for example, this side is just slightly higher than that side. Ever so slightly, not all that significant, but a little bit of a difference there. Looking through the back here, between the trunk and the rear quarter panel, I did notice just a slight misalignment here, and the gap is a little bit wider than I would say compared to the best ones from Lexus or Acura. And otherwise, the body fit is really well made. In terms of paint job, it's a little hard to show you in this condition because the car is wet, but obviously I've seen this car when it's dry, and it is, the paint job is very good. It's consistent all the way through. You can tell by kneeling it on the side of a car and looking at the reflection, and it's all the way very consistent all the way through. So that's really good. I would say though, in terms of the amount of gloss that you see, amount of the shine that you see on this paint, maybe not quite as good as some of the best in the industry, but it's right up there anyways. It's very competitive. Going back to design here, the only thing I'm not too crazy about is the rear design. I really like this Cadillac's new approach, kind of this teardrop approach like this. Both back and the front is also like this. Beautiful design in the front. I really like this sharp, almost kind of Audi-like design, but with unique touches to Cadillac. So I like this kind of angled design. But I would say the back one, I'm not so sure. It's nothing wrong with the rear design, but this kind of teardrop design, I don't know if that's the best look for this particular car. By the way, one big change for this CT5V is that they dropped a V8 engine and replaced it with a V6 engine. Still very powerful. It's a twin turbo too, but some people might miss the dramatic departure from the previous V8 and onto this V6 engine. But anyway, the package still works. One complaint I do have about the design or the feature is this electric door design. You just have to touch this to lock it, and to open it you just pull on the door handle. However, if you just don't quite do it right, sometimes it gets stuck a little bit. So because the actual door handle does not move this way, instead of pulling it, you kind of have to touch it, then pull straight through. If you don't do that smoothly, sometimes the door gets stuck a little bit. Like here you go, so it gets stuck again. So I would say I prefer a more of a mechanical door, which you actually will open towards you and the door flings open, or completely electric like the one in Tesla or Porsche, where you just literally touch it with your finger and the door mechanism opens. But this one is kind of in between. Not quite sure about that feature yet. Here's an inside look. Again, as an engineer, what I do is look for design, look for fit and finish, and Cadillac did a great job of integrating each of these features very carefully. Great also stitching all the way through, and more stitching on the dash. And also really nice feature is this suede Alcantara style steering, which is often an expensive option on Porsches, and this adds a very interesting feel to the steering when you drive this car, which I'll show in a minute, and very much appreciated because it's a unique design. And this suede goes all the way around here. So if you look at the stitching and fit and finish, first class all the way through. I really like the carbon fiber look, and all the stitching on the dash as well. And the seats looks good. Again, there's more of this orange stitching to go with the rest of the car, and the overall design is very user-friendly. Nice, very large infotainment system, which I'll show in a second as well. And I like the Cadillac's new design feature where all the buttons lined up. It's at least we're getting buttons. Too many car companies are designing infotainment system with no buttons at all or very little buttons. This one has proper buttons, although these could be a little bit bigger. And I also like having the rest of the buttons here. So very easy to operate. You start the engine here, and that will show you the actual infotainment system. Compared to some of its competitors, actually GM did a pretty good job with the infotainment system. It's easy to use, it's very large, it's quick, the response is pretty quick. You can just use it like an iPad almost, and the apps and so forth are actually quite user-friendly. Like most manufacturers, no one does this very well, and just switching to Apple CarPlay makes everything easier, but they've done the best they can to make the apps nice and big. The icons are large, and it's very easy to use. And as I mentioned, the buttons, otherwise there's a physical buttons for all the other functions as well. So here you can see some more information there, and this car has a head-up display as well, which is hard to see right now, but lots of technology in this car. So let's take it for a spin. So one of the very first things you notice about driving this this car is that the general feel of the steering is surprisingly good. They've I think really worked to refine the feel of the steering, the feel of the ride and drive, which is really hard to calibrate, are actually pretty good. So what we call the on-center feel, which is the feeling that you get when you begin to turn your steering left to right off the center, there is a little bit of a resistance that makes you go back to the center. We call that on-center feel. And most car companies do not design that part very well. They get it all wrong. And because it's an electrical mechanical steering as opposed to a hydraulic steering from the from years ago, you can calibrate and computerize that feeling. So it's mostly to do with the programming and calibration that brings that feeling back to your hands. And I would say of all the different domestic and North American cars I've driven, this particular Cadillac has a really good road feel. The way the steering communicates with you, the way the road feels as you're driving, you know, basically the feeling you get in your hands as you're driving, it's very well designed. And it's got a pretty good heft. And what I mean by heft is how heavy the steering is, and whether or not that feeling of heaviness changes as you drive faster. So most car companies design so that the steering is lighter when it's low speed and it gets heavier as you go up higher speed. But some car companies, they don't know how to calibrate that very well, and the transition from light to heavy or heavy to light is abrupt. But but manufacturers that really know how to calibrate that, like a Porsche, have such a really well-designed system that the progression from light to heavy or heavy to light is very natural and progressive. And you know what? I'm pretty impressed with this Cadillac steering feel. It's a very progressive feel, very natural feel, but enough heft, enough heaviness in the steering to give you a plenty of a feeling of sportiness, which is often lacking in a car of this type. Sort of the kind of mid-size, compact and mid-size luxury sport market is full of cars that have a really numb steering. And on this particular model, it's that calibration is pretty good. On the other hand, if you step on the gas a little bit, the sound of the engine, of course, there's a real sound of the engine, which is fine, but there's also the artificial sound which they put into the car. It's you know, basically a computerized mechanism and a system that generate fake engine sound, and it's piped through the speakers. And some are very obvious that it's fake, and sometimes it's not very obvious. So in terms of this particular Cadillac, the fake engine, which augments and supplements the real engine sound, is not very well calibrated. You can choose a different mode, driving modes, and if I put on a sport mode versus a normal mode, which is called tour mode, then the engine sound gets a little bit louder, the fake engine sound I should say, and it sounds very unnatural. I'm not sure why Cadillac chose this particular sound as the engine noise to be piped through the inside of a car, but it doesn't sound natural. It's very kind of like a tinny. It's kind of well, actually, you know what? It just doesn't sound like a real engine. So I would say that's my number one complaint about general feeling of driving this car is, and so I'll show you right now. If I step on the gas, so you hear this kind of slightly throaty sound, and if you step on the acceleration very hard, then actually the sound gets deeper and it sounds more natural. But in everyday drive, normal drive, like right now I'm just stepping on the gas maybe 10 to 15%, then the sound that's coming through is not natural. It doesn't sound right to me. So the transition from the normal drive sound to the heavy acceleration sound is something is quite off. So I really wished and hoped that GM can recalibrate for maybe future models. So the engine sound I'm not too crazy about. The steering feel is good. I would say that something like an Audi S4 or even S5, S6 still has a little bit more natural steering. Mercedes C-Class has a really good steering feel. And so some of those models, I think they do still a better job. But it's got a more progressive feel than many other Asian, Japanese, or Korean models in this price range, in this type of car. So steering wheel feel is good. The acceleration is plenty, except for the engine sound. It sounds a little weird, but the actual acceleration level is it's plenty of power and torque. When you step on a car, takes off. It's pretty natural, progressive push. It doesn't it doesn't come across suddenly and you're kind of out of balance. That isn't the case. I think General Motors have done a pretty good job trying to balance the performance of this car with the natural feeling of what makes a good handling car. On other notes, the braking is a bit sensitive. I did notice the braking is very powerful, but it just feels a little bit different from other cars. It's the first 5% of the brake pedal you touch. It's a bit sensitive, so you just have to kind of keep your feet a little bit light, but it's strong enough. There's nothing wrong with the functionality of the braking. It's just a bit sensitive to the foot when you first step on the brake. What else can I say? The ride is actually pretty good. Nothing wrong with the ride at all. Smooth, refined. It takes bumps really well. The car doesn't lose composure when it goes over a bump. I would say the balance of a good cornering suspension and at the same time giving good ride, which is not always possible to have those two in balance. I think they've done a really good job with that calibration. So suspension is good, ride is smooth. It's very quiet except for that one engine noise. So I keep coming back to that engine noise. I don't know, they're gonna have to recalibrate that noise. It just doesn't sound natural and it's intrusive. In fact, it sounds better when you step on the gas much harder and the kind of deeper exhaust sound comes through. Even though that's also somewhat fake, it sounds more natural. So I hope they really get that fixed right. Otherwise, it's a fun to drive car. It's solid. The ride is good. It's refined. It's more fun to drive than I expected. Good engagement overall. And you know what? You wouldn't even know that this is a North American product if you didn't look at the badge and look at the Cadillac badge. Honestly, it feels a lot like a German sedan, German product. They must have benchmarked against Audi, BMWs, and Mercedes quite extensively because it kind of feels very German. So, which is actually a good thing. Otherwise, in terms of general ergonomics of the dash, of the gauges, and the way seat feels is excellent. I like the big infotainment system. It's within easy reach. I know you can't kind of see that right now from the camera, but it's within easy reach. I'll show you that a little bit later on. It's actually better designed than many other mid-size cars I've come across, because oftentimes the infotainment system is too far from your hand and you have to really reach to control it and manage it. But in case of this particular car, it's within easy reach and ergonomically is well designed. The seats are quite comfortable and has a really good side support, and so even if you drive a little bit aggressively, it holds you well in the seat. It feels comfortable. Other ergonomics factors like how you sit in the car and how the hand feels naturally onto the steering, all good. That's all really well designed. The engine stops as you come to a stop. It's got the start stop, and as soon as you lift your feet off the brake, the engine starts, as you can hopefully hear that. And if you go back 3 or 4 years ago, this engine stop was really poorly done and poorly executed, and so it was often very abrupt as the engine started. But these days the start stop technology is so advanced that you almost forget the engine is starting and stopping. Some people might ask, is that really bad for the engine and for the starter? It used to be, but not anymore. They've designed this so well that you can keep on doing this for years and years, and it's not going to break anything in the to do with the engine. So really great job with that. In general, I enjoy driving this car. It has a good sense of engagement. It's not boring. Is it as good as some of the benchmark out there? Perhaps not. You know, if I compare it to, let's say, an Acura TLX, which I drove very recently, which is like yesterday, I would say this car is a little bit sportier, and the steering actually is slightly better than the Acura. The Acura is pretty good, but you have to put it into sports mode in order for steering to come alive. But this car, even in the touring mode, is very good. Now there's also a track mode. If you put it, it gets even more aggressive, but I like it in the sport mode. Now one thing I did notice on this car too is that if you put it in sport mode, in most manufacturers, most automakers brand, when you stop the engine and start again, it goes back to normal mode. It defaults back to the simple economy mode or comfort mode. But in this car, actually it remembers. And so if I put it on sport mode and shut the engine off and I come back the next day, it remembers and leaves it in sport mode. I don't know why other brands cannot do that. It's likely to do with the fuel economy rating, because certain cars have to be kept in a default mode to attain a certain fuel economy rating. But anyway, I'm glad that Cadillac allows the car to remember and retain the mode when you shut down the engine. That's rare these days. Audi used to do that, but not anymore, and everything defaults back. Even Porsche defaults back to comfort mode when you turn the engine off, with the exception of the Macan, which for some reason still remembers the sport mode. So otherwise, again, a good engagement, good feeling car in terms of driving, and overall it's a pretty sharp car, reasonably comfortable and much sportier than you expected in this car, in this type of car. It's a really good overall balanced drive feel. So as a summary, what do I think? Well, first of all, a great attempt by General Motors to get the CT5 to be benchmarked against some of the best sports sedans in the marketplace and come reasonably close. It's definitely not a Mercedes, Audi, or BMW territory yet, but overall, in terms of the handling, the general feel, the driving experience and engagement, is not too far off from some of the German brands. And in fact, I would even say that it's better than some of the Japanese or other Asian brands in comparison to, let's say, Infiniti, Lexus, or Acura, or Genesis. The steering feel and the overall handling is actually pretty good. And while the Acura TLX is probably the benchmark right now, the brand new model, if I were to compare this to somewhat aging Lexus IS or compared to Lexus ES, this car definitely handles better. And even compared to some of the newer models from Genesis, I actually think the steering feel and the overall handling is better on this CT5 as well. And I would say maybe though the refinement, kind of overall refinement level, while the car is smooth and reasonably quiet, is not quite up there with the best of the best. So the engine sound is kind of weird. It doesn't feel natural. Sometimes the suspension hops a little bit. Not all that bad, but not quite as good as the best from the German brands. And as I also pointed out earlier, the way the door locks and opens, the door handle, I should say, from the outside, it's a bit odd. It's sometimes not quite smooth when you try to open the door, and if you don't grip the door handle a certain way, it just gets a little stuck there. So that design needs a little bit more refinement. So great overall package and overall a good balance, but not quite the benchmark yet. But it's gone way better than it used to be in terms of what Cadillac or General Motors used to produce in this marketplace. So my standard 2 questions to finish off my summary is, first, what would I give this car in terms of overall report card, in terms of like A, B, or C ranking in comparison to other cars in this marketplace? And then if I were to purchase this car, if I own this car in 3 years, would I still be happy? Would I keep it, or would I likely change this car to something else. Well, first of all, in terms of report card, I will give it a solid B. Maybe even a B plus, because it's got a good handling and they come a long way in terms of the basic suspension, how they work together with the engine and the chassis. Well done, very well done. But because of the fact that there are certain few things that seems a little bit immature and lack some refinement, this is a very difficult market to benchmark against. You're competing against some of the best products in the world, whether it's BMW 3, 4, or 5 series, Audi A4 or A5 or A6 series, Mercedes C or E-Class. There's so many great products in this price range that in comparison to the best of the best, I would have to say this car is a B car, maybe B plus. But if you throw in the value factor in terms of pricing, hey, it's a very good value for the price. What might cost with other brands another $10,000 or $20,000. Well, this car is 10-15 grand cheaper than similarly equipped models from other brands. So in terms of value, I give it a really high score. But in 3 years, if I own this, would I keep it? That's a hard one to say, because overall I'm very happy with the engagement of this car, and it's a really good car to drive around town. But because of the few annoying things that it has, and plus the fact that there are so many great cars in this industry, in this particular segment, I'm pretty sure in 3 years I'll be tempted to change this car to something else if I did own this car. So again, nothing particularly wrong with this car. It ranks well, it benchmarks reasonably well, but I'm pretty sure if I kept it for 3 years, I would want to try something different, just because I know other automakers and brands have or will have in 3 years some fantastic cars to try out. So, but all in all, a great car for the money and for the price. Really good value, and the balancing of the performance and the ride and the smoothness and refinement is right up there with some of the best. Just a few annoying things that I hope Cadillac will take care of in the next few years, and the car will be that much better. So great job, Cadillac. Let's keep improving this thing. Peace out. Thank you, everyone.